Look, I know you've already achieved unheard of levels of success as an entrepreneur. So the real question is, while the world is radically shifting, how do we not get caught up in the chaos, but instead access our untapped capacity? You know what I'm talking about. I'm Katie Richardson, business coach to superstar entrepreneurs and host of What's Working Now. I'm here to show you how to unlock and magnify your untapped potential so that we can create the dream, live with purpose, and do what we are born to do. On this podcast, we are asking a different set of questions. Be present, be curious, be right now. Let's go. Hit that subscribe button and go to whatsworkingnow.com, drop in your email, join the waitlist so you never miss an episode of What's Working Now. And I'll see you on the inside.
Hello, welcome back to the show. This is Katie Richardson. You're on What's Working Now. And today we're having a masterclass on raising capital, but not just raising capital, doing it in a way that aligns with your values where you can maintain your integrity. Right, Ryan?
That's right.
Today, we've got Ryan Miller on the show. He is a venture capital and angel investor in technology, life sciences, and alternative energy. He's a recovering asset manager who launched his career on Wall Street right at the height of the 2008 crash. And hopefully he's going to tell us that story. At the peak of the market pain, Ryan Miller built his career from scratch, leading him to make millions in venture capital within his first few years in the industry. His podcast, Making Billions with Ryan Miller, which, by the way, can I just say, so many people throw out that word billion and they don't actually mean it. They don't have backing, and you mean it. So we'll get into that more. Making Billions with Ryan Miller was recently ranked in the global top 15 venture capital podcasts on the internet, as well as top 2.5% of podcasts in the world. Ryan Miller, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. A huge fan of what you've put together, the What's Working Now, not only you, but the community and the movement you've created. I've been a big fan for a long time. So it's certainly my honor to be able to come on your show, and maybe we'll mix it up on some fun topics. But okay, looking forward to it, man. Huge fan.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. You and I met several months ago. We were both speaking at the same event, and very quickly I could see this is a principled individual who lives his principles. And those are my people. And this is why you and I have stayed in touch. We were vacationing in Miami recently together. Yep. And, as I consistently talk to you, Ryan, I see how you have a really unique perspective. And I know there's a lot of wisdom behind that. So tell us the story of the experience, maybe just one, maybe multiple, I don't know, but experiences that have really formed and shaped this unique perspective that you have.
That's a great question, Katie. So, I started my career back in 2008. All I wanted to be was an investment banker when I grew up. But don't worry, Katie, I've since repented of my sinful ways, but I thought that was just the way to go. So I'm old enough to remember being a younger Gen Xer. So I've just dated myself. But I remember growing up, seeing all these Wall Street movies. And during that time, I grew up in, I'll do air quote, the neighborhood. I'll let you decide what it means. I think we know what that means. So I grew up in an area where not a lot of people were looking for a way out or believed that it was possible. And so growing up in the neighborhood, it was either music, academics, or sports. Well, I loved dabbling, playing blues guitar. I was okay at skateboarding. I really leaned on academics to get out. And so watching these Wall Street movies, I didn't even know what that was, right? They're driving Lamborghinis, married to beautiful people. I was just like, whatever that is, that's probably what I want to do, because it was so opposite of what I could see around me. And so I got into the number one accounting school in the world at the time and studied my butt off, gave up, dating and football games, all the fun stuff that comes with going to university. And I just studied and studied and studied because I knew where I came from. And I was determined to never go back to the neighborhood. Not that it was anything bad or negative, just wasn't for me. And so I studied my butt off, graduated with a finance degree, and got my first job on Wall Street in 2008. It was literally the worst city, the worst degree, the worst time, right? And so everybody's going bankrupt. I don't know what's going on. And being that I'm from Canada, it was a double whammy for me because no job, no visa. So guess what? I had to move back to the neighborhood. Oh, man. Ouch. So during that time, after everything that I fought for, and that's the entrepreneur journey, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah.
You do everything right, and it still can slip through your fingers. But I knew that not everything is permanent, Katie. Some things are just in transition, including ourselves, right? And so I was like, you know what? I refuse to lay down and die. I refuse to believe that I've lost everything, because it felt like it, right? So here I am back in the neighborhood, had to leave the country I love, friends that I love, and really start over. And so I started consulting. I worked my way in, built my first venture capital portfolio. My fees were $20,000, $30,000. And trust me, when you have no job and you're just starting out, $30,000 is a lot. But I kept that and I built my venture capital portfolio. And over 4 or 5 years, I was able to generate a pretty good return for myself. And then during that time, I was also a CFO of an insurance company. I did a $250 million IT projects portfolio. I did mergers and acquisitions of oil fields. Now, I don't know, I sit on boards of pharmaceutical companies. I've launched a few investment funds and launching a few more in the United States. So it's been a full 360. It's been a wild journey, and I cannot wait to get into this deeper with you.
Well, yeah. And let's go deeper, because I think people can relate to a lot of what you were sharing, feeling like I've got to get out of, quote, the neighborhood. And, sometimes it's a dream that drives us. And sometimes there are things that we're running away from. Yeah. And, you've been really vulnerable and honest with me to share some of the difficulty from your childhood. And, what were some of those things that maybe you were running from?
Sure. So growing up in the neighborhood, I grew up fighting all the time. It was very violent. So I grew up in a part of Canada that was run by what we call the NDP. It's our socialist party. And during that time, well, very well intended, it just doesn't seem to work. And so grew up, everybody was equally poor, equally violent, equally drunk. And there was just a lot of substance abuse. It was really and you don't realize it because you become desensitized to it as a child. And so growing up that way, there's a lot of pain, a lot of misery during that time. And so I saw firsthand the damaging effects that socialism can have. When you read it, it's beautiful. When you see it in practice, it was rough. And so very quickly, I looked for alternatives to that. And during that time of looking for alternatives, part of that struggle actually ended up in my early teens. I ended up living on the street. And doing that, like I said, you grew up fighting, and part of growing up on the streets is you learn that two things that I still maintain today, the two most valuable assets in your possession, whether you're living on the streets or you're grinding it out in the business world, is your reputation and your relationships. And so those are your two most valuable assets in your possession. And when I say reputation, I just mean integrity. Now, growing up on the streets, growing up in a very violent place and different things that are around you in that time, your reputation and your relationships are a matter of life and death. And so harvesting that, building reputation, relationships, I was never like nothing illegal, right? You think like reputation, like you're some crime boss. No, I was a kid. And, the ability to bring people together to create that protective circle around you and around them is a key way to survive. That not only worked when I was a kid on the streets, but it continues to work in business today.
Wow. So now I'm really curious about, as you started to experience new levels of success that you previously was just a dream, right? Something that you would imagine in your mind. Yeah. That fighting spirit got you there. And then oftentimes that fighting spirit can then become the very thing that has you self-sabotaging or self-destructing because I can't get it unless it's a fight, right? And so then you end up being a fighter your whole life. So have you had any experiences where you've been able to kind of evolve that fighting spirit into maybe a new level of drive? What does that look like?
Yeah. So finding another gear, right? We've been in those moments, especially if you're an entrepreneur, gritty fund manager, whatever you want to be, you got to find another gear. So you have those times that do it. And so when you're learning to move forward in your career and you want to bring that fighting spirit, I call it the warrior. And so often in throughout our careers or just our lives, there's different sides of our psychology that's required. And so I was kind of crazy and I just adopted these personas or these archetypes. And so managing archetypes in your own personality, because we're not one thing, we're not one emotion, we're many. And so these archetypes really do help us. And so often I would cultivate the archetype of the warrior. And you get to learn over the years. There's a little bit of gray in my beard now, so there's hopefully some wisdom in all of these different things that I've done. But one thing I've learned is, yes, sometimes you need to bring forward the warrior archetype. Now, the great thing about the warrior is it's good in short bursts. It's right. But you also need to recover. You cannot work and operate in warrior mode forever. It'll burn you out. Yeah. And so too many high performers, and I'm sure anybody listening to this show is certainly a high performer and looking to level up. Too many of us rely on the warrior too much, and it's not fair to the warrior. The inner warrior inside of us can really help us leap out. If you're ever stuck in a rut, like if you've been skiing or snowboarding, you would literally have to leap to get out of this rut, or it'll control you rather than controlling your direction. And so the warrior gives you those short bursts and that energy to fight. But where the real skill comes down is learning when to lay down your sword and, turn your swords into, I don't know, plowshares or whatever the saying goes. That's an important skill, is to not only just define yourself as a fighter or a carbaholic or whatever labels we give ourselves, but learning to actually bring in different sides of yourself when required. It'll completely change the game in your own personal performance.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I think so often we define ourselves in like this really broad stroke label and even our skills and abilities. And what I have experienced as I've worked on myself is there's so much nuance to really connecting with people, to being successful in business. There's so much nuance in knowing when to use which skill. So with that in mind, raising capital, I think to so many people, it's just this unknown world. And I know, especially the first time I raised money, I was a product designer who was having success in my brand. And all of a sudden I needed capital. And it was this unknown world. And I've watched myself and other people do this, where you venture into that world, you have no idea what you're doing. And you do a deal with somebody who does know what they're doing, and you get taken advantage of. And so I don't necessarily want to talk about that piece of it, but I think there's so much unknown. And so I'm really curious, what are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to raising capital?
The first one is that you cannot do it. The second one is that no one's going to believe in you. Those are total misconceptions and all very natural for everybody starting out. So everybody starts like, no one's going to invest in me, or, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people, when you haven't done it, you don't know what's waiting for you on the other side. So you get lost in your head. And as some sayings, philosophers say, when you're in your head, you're dead. And so learning to get out of your head and just being a little bit factual, that's number one, is just believing that you can. One of the greatest things, and I do this when I'm raising capital, I had somebody ask me, like, why is it that you get all of these comments? People are huge raving about you when they get to work with you. What is it that you do? And I didn't know, but I had to think about it. And I think to answer your question, I'll give you a little bit of a story. And so when you're helping people to maybe take them from seeing the world as option A and helping them to see a new alternative, the ability to see is really hope, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Hope gives you a new sight, right? So I remember a story about a man who had to take his family across the wilderness and had to then build a boat and to go across the seas. And this person was like, how am I going to build a boat? I don't know what to do. And the ability, when you have hope, you begin to look around, knowing what you need to do, not knowing how, but knowing what needs to be done. You're able to look at a forest and see a ship. And imagine the kind of investor, entrepreneur, or even person that you can be is where everybody's just seeing a bunch of random trees. You're seeing the next level. You're seeing the next opportunity. So the ability to look at a forest and see a ship is really what hope does. And so giving people hope, helping them to see the same thing they've been looking at just in a different way, really helps them to say, this is your ship. This is your way out. You're worried about inflation. You're worried about next quarter's returns. You're worried about retirement, whatever that might be. Helping them to see alternatives I think, and generating hope and vision, I think is really the foundational skills needed in raising capital.
Yeah, I think if somebody can kind of get their bearings, okay, I'm going to raise capital and, I've got all of these pieces in place and all I need is the funds to do it. What are some of the key variables they need to understand to be able to move forward and start raising the money?
That's a great question. So I would say in your first 3 minutes, your job is to get them to know you, like you, and trust you. So what does that mean? Well, it essentially means that you're appealing to some of the oldest part of the brain, which is over your sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. So for those of you who would prefer me to speak in English, that just means your fight or flight. So when you first meet someone, you address lizard brain. So when I pitch, this is all neuroscience. Okay. So it's not just I'm a smooth salesman. This is really how the brain works. So the initial thing is when you first meet someone, they don't know you, you don't know them. Guards are up, right? Fight or flight. Yeah, and so helping people to understand that, hey, I'm not going to hurt you. In fact, I only want you to eat a little better than you are now. Croc brain begins to relax. Could you imagine? Now, this doesn't have to be raising capital. It could be with spouses, work colleagues, your children. Could you imagine trying to recommend that they take a different approach, but they're still guarded? It's not going to happen. They're not going to listen to you. No matter how much of an expert you are in your field, if they are guarded, forget it. Like, don't start going through your presentation. Really just work on building that relationship, that rapport right out of the gates, I think is one of the first key things that you need to do just to help croc brain or lizard brain to just relax. And just know, don't be guarded. We're on the same side. I want to do a good deal. I want to make you a lot of money. I want to make a lot of money. All the incentives are aligned. All we need is a couple $1,000,000 and we can get this project going.
Okay. So we need to have them lower their walls, create human connection so that you can have a real, honest conversation about what their needs are, what your needs are, how you can potentially align and move forward. So I want to hear some stories of maybe somebody who was considering raising capital, didn't totally know if somebody who's going to invest in me, and you coached them and you walked them down this path, and now they're able to take their gifts and talents, that skill that they're really good at, bring the capital, and they're able to create an impactful business. Can you share any examples and stories?
Yeah, I'll share the first person that drank the Kool-Aid, which was myself. So, and so I've replicated this for about 500 people as well. So, during that time when I didn't know what I was doing, right? I had to move back to the neighborhood, as I mentioned before, had to reinvent myself. And I was like, I just wanted to do deals. Like any carnivorous investment banker, you just want to do deals. And so I thought, you know what? During this time, I just graduated grad school. So I was very well versed in technical stuff. So the first thing that I would say when you're going out, the thing to remember is you want to sell the sizzle, not the steak. What I mean by that is you have to get your potential investor, you have to get them emotionally tied to the deal. See, when I started out, I was all technical. So I did the math, which you would figure I would know, but just, I don't know, a few weeks ago. And I actually realized I was in school for 11 years, right? Wow. So maybe that's accomplishment. Maybe that's just sad. I'll let you decide. But so I was in for so long. And when you're in academia for that amount of time, you're very well rewarded for being highly technical. You go out on the streets and you're highly technical, you'll put people to sleep. It's like the worst thing. Do you imagine if all we talked about is statistical models? Like, it would be a very finite group that would be interested in that. For the rest of us, we're just like, what are you talking about? So when I say sell the sizzle, not the steak, it means, yes, you have to know your numbers. When you're raising capital, you do need to know your business attributes, your strategy, and your numbers. But what does that mean to the investor? And so when I started to adopt the phrase, what this means to you, or what this means to our investors, it changed everything. And so helping them understand the meaning of what you're saying. See, the way the human mind works is not only do we assimilate facts, but we retain those facts because we understand what they will mean to us. And so helping them to retain the facts by helping them to understand the meaning of those facts in their lives, personal condition that they will experience, that's when you really start, the rubber hits the road, you start to have traction and people really start to buy into your vision because you've helped them to see how they are a part of your vision.
So let me make sure I get this correct. We have the technicalities, we have the numbers that they need to see, right? We have to meet that. But then we also have to show them the connection between those numbers and what matters to them. And that's where we bring in the emotional connection to the opportunity. And that's where we really create a partnership.
That's right. And what I like to tell people who ask for my opinion is you want to think conversation, not presentation. See, too often people who are just starting out, myself included, was I was highly technical. You sit down and listen to me to blab for 30 minutes and people are like, and then after you're like, makes sense, right? You want to give me money, right? And they're like, yeah, probably not. And so because it was all just, here's the presentation, here's what EBITDA is in year 7, and you just put them to sleep. And it wasn't until I shifted from presentation to conversation that it became more natural, that it started to flow, that it felt like an interaction. And I, little by little, through a conversation, I was in a better position to understand what they cared about because I shut my mouth every once in a while and I would listen and have them tell me what they care about.
And you know that I love principles and I'm looking for those core principles to apply to lots of different areas. And we're talking today about raising capital, but what you're describing is how you get really good at sales. It's how you negotiate an incredible contract with a potential partner. As you're describing all of these principles, I'm seeing the many different ways I've experienced some of these things throughout my entrepreneurial journey. And something that you and I have in common is all of this doesn't matter if we don't have our integrity. That's right. And I've witnessed this within myself. Like, it's embarrassing to admit, but I've witnessed it within myself and I've seen it in others. As your business builds momentum and you start having success, or maybe you're not, I don't know, but like you start to see that what you want is just right there in front of you. And we get like Smeagol who wants the ring, and it's just like willing to do anything to achieve and accomplish that thing, including throwing our integrity out the window. And like I've worked with people who will promise, I call them two-face, because they'll promise one thing and then like an hour later they're contradicting themselves. It's called gaslighting, I know. But like those people are operating without integrity. And like as I witnessed that in others, I was able to see how and where I was doing that within myself and make corrections. And why does integrity even matter to you? If it's about reach, if it's about impacting people, then why don't we just utilize all means possible to getting to that point? Why does integrity matter?
Yeah, integrity matters a lot. So as sad as that sounds, I teach people, I'm like, look, we're all in business. You don't necessarily have to be better. You just have to be different. And so what I say is, if you want to be different, make it a point to be known for integrity. See, as we mentioned before, reputation, relationships. And when I talk about reputation, that's really what I'm talking about, is integrity. And so helping people to understand that you are a person that they can trust, right? We talk about know, like, and trust in the beginning of your pitch, helping them to understand that. And when you build your reputation relationship, those are assets, and assets can put money in your pocket. And so when you craft yourself into the kind of person that is desired for capital, money and deals begin to come to you. It'll go where it's best treated. And so when people know to say, Katie does good deals, Ryan does good deals, maybe they don't give me the highest return or on paper, but I know I can trust them. The money's going to go where people trust that it's taken care of, not necessarily where a percent or a couple points more. So I found that giving yourself an edge can really come down to being morally sound and being that person who does good deals that are win-win for everybody. That's how you're going to grow. And all of a sudden, wouldn't it be nice to run your business where just money and opportunities come to you, where people are lining up to work with you? What I've found is that all comes from integrity.
Wow. 100%. Yeah. And what's beautiful is, like, as I have witnessed this, so I'm a business coach and I coach people, and it's a big part of what I do is integrity. And that often means having a very uncomfortable conversation. That means being vulnerable and owning a mistake that you made and having that difficult conversation. And oftentimes people use all kinds of manipulation and dysfunctional tools to try and skirt around their integrity. And I've witnessed really incredible things that happen when someone just leans into their mistake, leans into the discomfort of that conversation that they've been avoiding. And it's like the stars align and the universe moves to support you in the direction that you're going. And there's something incredible about just being your word and doing what you say you're going to do. And it's as simple as that. And yet, so often we can struggle with it. I don't know, can you think of an experience where you were at that crossroads and maybe the old Ryan would have gone down the road of dysfunction or denying, and you made an integrous move and it ended up, I don't know, supporting you in what you wanted?
Yeah. I think it just comes from getting burned in the past, right? And so it's not always that you just read this good book. Could be. So inspiration can come from a lot of places. And sometimes that just comes from almost the anti-example of what you want, right? The mirror image to say, wow, that sucked. If we've ever, for those of you listening to us, if you've ever had a boss you prefer not to have in your career that just made your life rough, those can make you better. I remember during COVID alone, that wasn't that long ago. It was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And everything fell out. All right. I don't have to repeat it. We were all there. And so we experienced that. And I remember sitting down, writing the antithesis to all of the different areas, right? So you can be a chump or a champ. You did it. And I went through all these things, and I told my wife, Emily, who you know, and I said, you know what? This is going to suck. I was like, I'm not going to lie to you. Right. So I put my executive hat on for a minute and I said, look, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to suck. We're not going to enjoy this. I don't know when it's going to end, hopefully soon, but I don't know. But one thing I can tell you is that you can decide what this will mean. So even though you have difficult conversations, you can decide ahead of time to say, I don't think I'm going to like this, but I am determined to honor this. And so you can go through crappy things and honor the power of that moment to shape you if you decide ahead of time. So when you know that there's some trouble on your doorstep, right? Maybe it's an economic recession, you're having cash flow problems in your business or marriage problems, you can just be like, look, I'm going to be honest. This is going to suck. It's going to be a painful climb out of this hole. I did nothing to deserve this, if that's the way you think. But really understanding that you can define the end goal from the beginning. And if you do that, that gives you power back to fight or flight. That allows you to drop your guards and do what you need to do. Tap into that warrior to say, this is going to suck. The warrior is going to take over. And you're saying, but I am determined to honor this moment, to become out of this a better person, and literally drop underwater, dance, and never get wet. So you want to come out just squeaky clean from that experience. You can become better through difficult moments in your life.
I'm curious, is there a season to capital raising? We're recording this right now in 2023. Markets are down. Real estate is dropping, only not where I live. And money is not flowing like it once was, or is it? That's my question to you is, are there still opportunities to be raising significant amounts of money right now today in 2023?
Yeah. So if you look at some of the reports, there is a lot of money sloshing around. The Fed was tightening interest rates, which just means they're reducing the amount of money that's flowing into the economy. And then banking crisis happened, so a little bit more liquidity was released. However, there's still a ton of money sloshing around. And so the belief that it's difficult to do it, don't believe it. Are there times where certain asset classes are more preferable than others? Yeah, absolutely. But no matter what, if you go back to our original conversation or some of the points we made earlier, Katie, was helping people understand what it means. And so when the market shifts, so do their needs. And so creating a pitch or your opportunity to fit the needs that they're currently looking for right now. So is it to preserve capital, to protect against inflation, to diversify into different countries? There's so many angles in helping them understand truthfully with integrity, helping them to understand how your opportunity gives them what they're looking for. I think you'll raise capital in any season. And
maybe in a way to kind of go back to what you were talking about when you're pitching to somebody, really identifying the meaning for them. And maybe in some ways, there's even greater opportunity of meaning for them right now with other difficulties going on around them, to really make that connection and find that partnership.
Yeah.
Ryan, I know you're a guy who has a lot of irons in the fire. What's something you're really excited about right now?
One of the sectors that I really like, I'm really interested in biotech, tech, healthcare. Those are some pretty hot markets. Energy transition, I think, is going to be really good. As I mentioned in the beginning of the show, I spent many years, cut my teeth in oil and gas. Wonderful market. But I also think that having many energy sources is very positive. And I think a lot of people who have capital are looking for that. So alternative energy, clean energy, fintech, healthcare. I mean, there's so much opportunity out there, so much capital looking for that opportunity. And all you got to do is stitch those two together and you're off and running. So the things that excite me, healthcare, clean energy, life sciences. I think psychedelics for mental health is going to be a pretty hot market. I mean, I could keep going, but you get the idea. Yeah.
You're a deep thinker. And so I'm curious, what's something that nobody's talking about right now, but you think they should be?
So I think, that's a great question. I think value levels. So I think on this show, I know the What's Working Now community is really big on principles. So maybe if that's all right with you and those are your listeners, maybe we can share a few principles.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that a lot of people may overlook when dealing with partnerships, finding, a romantic partnership and to get someone to marry, all of those things, a lot of variance in those experiences come from different value levels. So what do I mean? Well, often when you grow up the way that I did, if you come from an area that's we'll say level 1, 2, and 3, what I mean by that is it's very, you're just worried about survival. And so if you partner with someone where your values dictate different priorities versus someone who came raw right out of the streets, they're worried about survival. And so as you move up, you become like this one-man army, so to speak, at value level 3. You're a bit of a rebel. And so often rebels can bring forward a lot of innovation. And so it is helpful. But as you continue to evolve out of that, things become universal. You become connected to different things. And so often you'll see a lot of people at level 3, maybe level 4, but it really starts to thin out. And so at level 4, what happens is you begin to get really good at building systems, social systems, financial systems, operating systems, whatever those are. You're very good at building systems and bringing people together. This would be great if you wanted to be an executive. So when I was an executive, building systems was 100% the way that we go. Level 5, very hard to find. Level 5, now you're good at leveraging those systems for the greater good. You begin to think universal. And so as you go from the individual to the universal and you start to scale up on your priorities and your perspective of the world, it's very important to partner and lock arms with people, whether that's family, whether that's business or anything else. It's really important to find people. Like if you're thinking universal and you want to help planet Earth and leverage these systems and you got these master plans, like I may or may not have at the moment, if you have all those things that you want to bring the world together, but then you're relying on people at level 2, level 1, level 3, who are they're out for themselves because they're concerned about, they're not selfish. They're just, their view of the world is, I'm worried about my survival. And you've got this universal thinking and these universal values. It's going to be values conflict can be really, really challenging. So I would advise people on your investors, your business partners, really look for a values match, not just a skills match. If you can get both, you're in good shape.
That's interesting because as I've been a business coach for like 6 years and I started to notice which clients were giving me life and which were not. And it was alignment and values. Which was, it was more of a personality type than it was necessarily a skill set.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing you say when it comes to raising capital. My brother told me really early on, he was an attorney. And when I was making my first deals, he was like, Katie, you have to think of this as a marriage. Like you are connecting yourself to these individuals. Do you want to be married to them inside of your business? And it had me looking at it very differently. And I think it's important to know and understand somebody's values before you sign that contract, before you move forward. And it's not like everything's going to line up, but I think we do individually, we need to be clear on what matters most to us. And can we find somebody who has similar alignment and values and partner and do our amazing things?
That's absolutely right. And I can share with you a story that maybe your audience will appreciate, if that's all right. I know you like stories. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've never told this story before, other than in my family. So you can laugh at me. It's pretty embarrassing, but I'll tell an embarrassing story. So when I was in high school, so in the context, before we get out, this isn't just about the story. This is about finding those values and not violating certain minimum standards that you have. So just keep that in mind in the context of the story. So this will be a metaphor, but it's 100% true story. So when I was in high school, there was a large country music festival. It was a big one. We lived in the prairies. And so we're going to go out there. That's where all the party is. We're, maybe 17 years old. And during that time, the only problem was, as I alluded before, we were so poor, right? And so we decided to go out because there was, maybe pretty girls and great music. It was just the party of the summer. And so we decided to drive out to this farmer's field. Hopefully we could find it with 20,000 people. And so we drove for about an hour. We found this place and there were guards everywhere. Every entrance in, they were making you pay to get in. And we're like, how do we... Right. So here's values violation number one is how do we get in without paying money? And so we looked around and everybody was guarding the entrance in. And we're like, man, we got to get in, but we don't have any money. How do we do this? Oh, this is so bad. So we looked at it and we said, look, there's a field around. We can drive around the backside. This is a farmer's field. We can just walk through the field and it looks like it's unguarded. We can walk in. It's so simple. Well, let's talk about why that was so simple. So we found this farmer's field and there was cows and everything. And so we parked far away, we turned our lights off and we decided to walk in, right? We're looking for a shortcut to get around to admission to the party of the good life. And so we're walking through, we see this pasture of cows and we're like, we walk by. Okay. No one's kicking us. Okay, good. And it was complete dark. And I don't know if you've ever had like huge stadium spotlights in your eyes at the middle of the dark. You can't see in front of you. So this is what was happening. So we're walking towards the stadium across what we thought was a flat field. So we're walking through the field and I see my friend's head and all of a sudden it drops. I hear him scream. I freak out. So I run over and then I drop and we fall down this creek bed filled with mud, right? And we're trying to get in and cut corners and we're trying to get into this party where we thought pretty girls we're already covered in mud. We probably smell like cows. This is not going well. These shortcuts is not going well. So we're seriously questioning our life choices at this moment. So we climb out the other side covered in mud and we're just like, oh, I just need a garden hose, which is not going to happen in a farmer's field. We're walking further and further and we're like, okay, only 40 more yards and we're in, right? And then it's party time. We're going to meet girls and all these things that a 17-year-old finds important. And then we start walking and the ground starts to soften and then it's wet. And so we're about ankle deep in what we thought was a swamp. And then the smell hits us. If falling down a creek and coming out the other side wasn't enough, we just realized that we walked through a septic field.
No way.
Yep. So here I was, an idiot, trying to like skip the $5 or $10
You've been around way too much manure that you didn't know you were in a septic field until you were ankle deep. Oh my word.
You got it. And so now you know why it wasn't guarded, because any idiot that would go through there, myself included, deserves exactly what they get. So here I am covered in mud, beat up from falling down, dodging cows running at me. And now my feet and my shoes are covered in sewage.
Oh my!
And so
word.
Little by little, we finally made it in, and we were disgusting. We were dirty. We were filled with sewage in our shoes. And this serves as a metaphor. This serves as a metaphor that often when we look for shortcuts throughout our life, we think that we're being smart by exploiting shortcuts. Too often, there are stumbles, there are creek beds, there is mud, there is sewage. And if you're not careful, you might find yourself standing in the middle of some serious crap. And so often, too often, There you go. So now we know this story. Too often when we cut corners, when we find ourselves, we think we're being smart, but you're actually being really stupid. And by that, I mean emotionally stupid, ethically stupid. I don't throw that word around too often, but you know what? Let's be honest. That was really stupid of me to do that. Yeah. And that served as a metaphor of just like when you try to cut corners, would you try to think that you're smart by doing less than required, or being dishonest by entering a place? So you can find yourself into some serious trouble, we'll say. So,
Ryan, and I love that you're ending here with this story because, again, I have witnessed and experienced this personally, the power of integrity, and yet we see those shortcuts, and it's like, what's wrong with that? And if somebody can learn from this story and this experience, and I have had to train my brain. I mean, now it's just habit, but in the beginning, I had to train my brain to stop looking for those shortcuts. And it's like, Katie, just trust integrity, trust what's required to getting there, and trust that process, and keep moving forward with that faith. And to your point, hope that you can get there, and it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy, but you might not be ankle deep in sewage. Oh my word. Yeah. Ryan, this has been amazing. And I want everyone to right now pull up your podcast. I mean, you're listening to a podcast right now. Go subscribe to Making Billions with Ryan Miller. We just scratched the surface on capital raising, and I've watched him teach and train. He's exceptional at what he does. Go listen to him, go follow him. Hopefully he will convince you that raising capital is the way to the next level for you and your business. Is there any other last instruction that you want to give people, ways that they can connect with you before we hop off?
Yeah, it's you can follow me on Instagram, Making Billions Podcast, and then also LinkedIn. Those are kind of the two areas that I'm most active on. It's my mission to bring people, to help as many people. I found an opening. I made it all the way from where I made it to the level that I'm at, and I'm going to keep going. And if I can help you and many of our listeners to do the same, please, by all means, reach out, follow the show. Anything I can do to serve, to just help encourage you along the way. That's what Katie and I are dedicated to do.
I love it. And we have like 30 seconds. I feel like I need to tell this story really quick, because I have noticed I've had enough people promise me things and then not deliver on them, that I'm very hesitant to move forward with anything and anybody. And after you and I met, you invited me to an event in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I was like, cool, awesome. Oh, and it's paid. And it's like, okay, great. I get that. Fine. And I was kind of hesitant because I knew I believed I was going to get pitched on something. You're like, no, Katie, this isn't a pitch. This is an opportunity to come networks with some really exceptional entrepreneurs. And I told you the moment I got there, I was like, I still have my walls up. Like, I'm still waiting for that moment. And you totally delivered on it. And it really has kind of blown apart my paradigm for gatherings and networking. You can genuinely come together and have an incredible time together and not have to pitch one another. And yet someday down the line, there's going to be a reason why you're going to network with that individual and maybe eventually do a partnership. And so I just wanted to acknowledge you, because I want people to know he's not blowing steam. He means it. He lives it. And I've witnessed it and experienced it myself. And so go follow Ryan. You can learn so much from him. Yes, in raising capital and so much more. And that is what is working now.
Hey, what's working now, listeners? What if you could turn your vision into reality? It turns out it's not that complicated. And the secret is revealed in my incredible guidebook, Be the One: How to Plan and Execute Your Unique Vision. It features my custom GPS method to ensure you get there fast. With this guidebook, you'll create a clear vision, a plan, and a path for getting there fast. Now you'll finally know where to focus and if you're on the right path. You can get your copy today for less than the cost of a Chipotle dinner. So if you're an entrepreneur and integrity matters to you, faith and family matter now, not later, and you feel called to make big contributions to the world, go to now.katierichardsson.com/guidebook and get started living your purpose today.